few weeks ago, I was able to give you guys a glimpse of the all-new Maxus D60, but that was before the launch, so I wasn't able to take it out on the road and give it a proper test drive. Well, now I have the car and the keys and an open road. So what are we waiting for? Let's go. Now, there are a lot of factors that come into play when forming your decision to buy a new car. There's looks, space, features. The list goes on. But for me personally, on top of that list would be driving dynamics. So let's see how the D60 does. Now, like what I mentioned in my initial review, this comes with a 1.5-liter turbocharged engine. And that seems to be the engine of choice these days. I'm seeing that kind of configuration in more and more vehicles. But this one pumps out 169 horsepower and 250 newton meters of torque. And those are pretty decent numbers. But let's see what that translates to when you put your foot down. Now, when I put my foot down, it took a split second for the transmission to downshift. But when it did, the power was delivered smoothly and there was more than enough of it. Now, power output and torque may be a quantifiable measure. But to a certain degree, I still feel it's somewhat subjective because what feels fast for me may not be fast for you. But at the very least, I can tell you that this car does what you tell it to do. So when you put your foot down, it will deliver the goods. Now, I mentioned earlier that driving dynamics is on top of my list when it comes to the factors to consider when buying a new car. But when you break that down, when you break down driving dynamics, there's also a lot of factors that come into play to determine what contributes to a good driving experience. And out of all those factors, for me, the steering feel is the most important one. Because for me, that's the primary driver's input. And the D60 does a really good job when it comes to providing a good steering feel. Because getting steering right it's a pretty tough job. It's a balancing act. If it's too light, the car feels disconnected. If it's too heavy, the car feels exhausting to drive. Now, the steering of the D60 is on the lighter side of the spectrum, but it still provides a good amount of feedback. So you always know where the wheels are pointing, and the steering ratio is just right. So it's quick to respond to your steering inputs without feeling too fidgety or flimsy. And most cars with light steering have pretty slow steering ratios, which makes the car feel a lot bigger than it actually is. But the steering ratio of the D60 is tuned pretty nicely. Now, this comes with a dual clutch transmission, and I must say that it shifts superbly. You actually don't feel it shift. In fact, you'll have to keep your eye on the tachometer just to tell if it's shifting or not, because you don't feel it. And I've been driving this thing for the better part of an hour, and it has not been jerky at all. It's been smooth shifting all the way. Okay, now let's talk about comfort. And when it comes to that, the suspension tuning plays a huge role, which is also a balancing act. Because if you tune the suspension too softly, then it's great over bad pavement, but it isn't exactly confidence-inspiring around the bends. And then if it's too stiff, it's great for handling, but a pain when it comes to ride comfort. And with the D60, I think Maxus hit the nail right on the head because it's balanced just right. It's comfortable, yet it feels planted around corners. So the handling is superb. It's spot on. Now, this is relatively a tall vehicle, but it doesn't feel that way. And there's hardly any body roll, which is quite surprising. So I'm not sure what kind of sorcery they did with this, but they got it right. Now, aside from a car's suspension, there are other things that contribute to the level of comfort you experience in the vehicle. And one of those factors would be how comfortable the seats are. And in the Maxus D60, there really isn't anything to complain about because it provides a good level of support, but it's not overly bolstered, yet your thighs and your entire back is well rested. And you can take this out on a really long drive, and I'm sure you will not experience fatigue. And I also love how the center console is padded, so I can rest my knees against it and it won't hurt. It still provides utmost comfort, and that's good attention to detail. And lastly, what really seals the deal in terms of comfort is how well this thing suppresses noise, vibration, and harshness. So this cabin does a spectacular job in keeping the noise from outside from creeping in. And that really contributes to a pleasant driving experience. Now, the Maxus D60 is one of the biggest crossovers in its segment, but it's still a breeze to drive because the visibility is really good. You can see the hood, and this dashboard sits pretty low. Plus, you have a low belt line, so you have a really good commanding view of the road, which makes the car feel smaller than it actually is. And it's easy to maneuver and park. And that's not just confined to the drive, because this is also extremely easy to operate. Everything is so ergonomic and easy to figure out. And this automatic climate control system may look ultra modern, but it still has physical switches, so you can operate the AC controls without even looking at it. Now, Maxus is a relatively new brand here in the Philippines. But in other countries, like Australia, it's known as LDV, and they've been around for quite a while. But since not everyone is familiar with the Maxus brand, it's time for a bit of trivia to get you better acquainted with the brand. So did you know that this received a 5-star C NCAP rating, garnering a score of 88.9? Next, did you know that the turbo in this thing is made by Honeywell? And last, the AC is made by Sandon. So those are all familiar brands. And no wonder I feel so cool in this thing. Literally speaking, of course. So in sum, I can honestly say that the D60 ticks all the boxes. And there may be more and more entries at this price point and in this segment, but this is still an extremely compelling choice, considering the power output, the comfort, the performance, the driving dynamics, plus the fact that you get third row seats. So that's pretty hard to beat.